Bullies mock the quiet kid, unaware he's the son of a Mafia boss. Vincent Carter slammed Luca Romano's locker shut, narrowly missing his fingers. Luca didn't flinch, he never did. His dark eyes remained steady as he stared at the group surrounding him. "What's wrong, Romano? Cat got your tongue?" Vincent sneered, his designer jacket and perfectly styled hair screaming of wealth. Behind him, Josh, Eric, and Dylan chuckled on cue like trained pets. Luca simply slid his hands into his pockets and stepped back. Not in fear, but as if avoiding dirt on his shoes. "Nothing to say?" "As usual." Vincent stepped closer. "You know, my father just closed another multi-million-dollar deal yesterday. What did your dad do? Fix someone's plumbing?" The hallway had grown quiet, other students pretending to be busy while secretly watching the daily ritual. "He probably doesn't even have a father," Dylan chimed in, his polo shirt bearing his family's country club emblem. "Just some immigrant mom cleaning toilets somewhere." Luca's jaw tightened slightly, the only sign he'd heard the insult. His olive-skinned face remained impassive, dark eyes unreadable. "Hey!" Marco Vinucci, Luca's only friend, pushed through the crowd. Unlike Luca's calm demeanor, Marco's face flushed with anger. "Back off, Carter!" Vincent turned, amused. "Well, if it isn't the other half of the poverty duo. Defending your boyfriend, Vinucci? You're such a predictable asshole." Marco spat. "Does Daddy know you need 4 guys to feel brave enough to pick on someone who doesn't even fight back?" The crowd oohed softly. Vincent stepped toward Marco, but Luca placed a hand on his shoulder. "Let it go, Marco," Luca said quietly, his voice carrying a hint of an accent. "It's not worth it." Vincent recovered quickly, shrugging off Luca's hand with disgust. "Listen to your friend, Vinucci. At least one of you knows your place." The bell rang. Vincent gestured to his crew, but not before Eric, accidentally, knocked Luca's books from his hands. "Oops," Eric said with mock sincerity, as they walked away laughing. Marco helped collect the papers. "I don't get how you stay so calm. I'd have broken Vincent's perfect nose by now." "Violence isn't always the answer," Luca replied, methodically gathering his notebooks. "Sometimes it is," Marco insisted. "The locker vandalism, the rumors, the accidental spills in the cafeteria. You need to stand up for yourself." Luca's lips curved into a faint smile, not of amusement, but something darker. "There are many ways to fight a war, my friend." "What does that mean?" "It means patience is a virtue," Luca replied. "Come on, we'll be late for economics." After school, Vincent and his friends lounged by their expensive cars. Vincent's latest acquisition, a sleek black BMW, gleamed in the afternoon sun. "Look who it is." Josh nodded toward Luca emerging alone. "Walking home again, Romano?" Vincent called out. "Need a ride?" "Oh wait, you'd have to sit on the floor, wouldn't want to stain my leather seats." Luca continued walking, seemingly deaf to their taunts. Vincent strode toward him, blocking his path. "Hey! I'm talking to you." The others quickly surrounded them. "You think you're better than us? Too good to answer when spoken to?" Luca finally looked up, making direct eye contact with Vincent. Something in that gaze made Vincent hesitate, a coldness, a depth that seemed out of place in a high school student. "Excuse me," Luca said quietly. "I need to go." Vincent shoved Luca's shoulder. "What's the rush? Got to help Mommy with dinner?" "My mother is dead," Luca stated flatly. Even Vincent seemed thrown off balance, but recovered quickly. "Well, that explains why you're so messed up. No woman's touch in your life. Bet your dad's some loser who—" "My father," Luca interrupted, his voice suddenly carrying an edge, "is a businessman." Vincent wasn't deterred. "A businessman," he mimicked with air quotes. "What, does he sell drugs on the corner?" "My father owns half the real estate in the city. Whatever your old man does, he's nothing compared to Charles Carter." Luca's expression shifted to something resembling pity. "You seem very proud of your father's accomplishments." Interesting that you have none of your own to speak of. Vincent's face reddened. You don't know anything about me. I know enough, Luca replied calmly. I know you hide behind your father's name and money. I know you surround yourself with people who fear rather than respect you. And I know that you are making a very serious mistake. A black Mercedes with tinted windows pulled up. The driver's window revealed a man in a suit and sunglasses who nodded once toward Luca. Excuse me, Luca said, stepping around Vincent. My ride is here. This isn't over, Romano, Vincent called after him. Luca paused at the car door, looking back. Actually, Vincent, it's just beginning. The Mercedes pulled away smoothly, leaving them staring in confused silence. Since when does Romano get picked up in a car like that? Eric asked. Vincent kicked at the ground. Who cares? Probably borrowed. Or stolen. I don't know, Dylan said hesitantly. The way he looked at you, it was kind of. Kind of what? Vincent snapped. He's a nobody. His whole mysterious quiet guy act is pathetic. You know what? Vincent's expression darkened as he pulled out his phone. I think it's time we showed Romano exactly what happens to nobodies who don't know their place. None of them noticed the black sedan parked across the street, or the man inside taking photos with a telephoto lens. In the Mercedes, Luca's phone buzzed with a text from Marco. You okay? Those jerks gone too far this time? Luca typed a simple reply. They're digging their own graves. He closed his eyes, his father's words echoing. Patience, mio figlio. In our world, revenge is a dish best prepared meticulously and served when they least expect it. You have to react eventually, Marco whispered during lunch the next day. 3 tables away, Vincent and his crew were loudly discussing their weekend plans at Vincent's lake house, making sure Luca could hear every detail of the luxury he'd never experienced. Luca took a bite of his sandwich, chewing methodically. I am reacting, Marco. Just not how they expect. What does that even mean? Marco leaned closer, frustrated. Yesterday they spray-painted charity case on your locker. This morning they replaced your history presentation with porn images. The whole class laughed. Except Mrs. Bennett, who gave Vincent detention. Luca pointed out, the faintest smile playing on his lips. That's nothing. A single detention when he should be suspended. Marco's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables. Luca placed a calming hand on Marco's arm. They're digging their own graves, Marco. I've set things in motion. Marco studied his friend's face, searching for any hint of what he meant. You keep saying that. What exactly are you planning? Instead of answering, Luca checked his watch, a simple but elegant timepiece that Marco had never seen before. I need to make a call. Save my seat. As Luca walked out of the cafeteria, Vincent's foot shot out, nearly tripping him. Luca sidestepped it with surprising grace, never breaking stride. Vincent's smirk faltered momentarily. Outside, Luca ducked into an empty stairwell and dialed a number from memory. Is it done? He asked in fluent Italian. Yes, Don Romano's son, the voice replied respectfully. The anonymous tip was delivered to both the FBI and Mr. Carter's board of directors this morning. And the evidence? In place. The investigators will find exactly what they need. Good. Luca ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, his expression unchanged. In his corner office overlooking the city skyline, Charles Carter scowled at the envelope on his desk. Inside was a simple typed note. Your company's offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands have been compromised. This is a friendly warning. Charles crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash. The third anonymous message this week, clearly competitors trying to rattle him before the Johnson merger. His assistant buzzed. Sir, there's an Agent Wilson from the FBI here to see you. He says it's urgent. Charles straightened his tie. Probably just a routine inquiry about one of their clients. Send him in. You can't keep letting them walk all over you. Marco insisted as they walked home after school. Vincent's BMW had roared past them minutes earlier, the occupants shouting insults out the window. I'm not letting them do anything, Luca replied calmly. I'm allowing them the rope they need. To hang themselves? Marco shook his head. This isn't one of your father's old country sayings, Luca. This is real life. Luca stopped walking. You have no idea what my father's sayings are about. Something in his tone made Marco pause. You never talk about your family, Luca. 4 years of friendship, and all I know is your mom died when you were young, and your dad is some kind of businessman who's never around. He's around more than you think, Luca said softly. Marco was about to press further when a sleek black Audi pulled alongside them. The window lowered to reveal a hard-faced man in his 40s. Mr. Romano wishes to see you, sir, he said to Luca. Luca nodded. Marco, I'll see you tomorrow. Wait, is that just a family associate? Luca cut him off, opening the car door. Don't worry about it. As the Audi drove away, Marco stood puzzled on the sidewalk. Something wasn't adding up about his quiet friend. Alessandro Romano was not a tall man, but he commanded presence. In his private study, surrounded by leather-bound books and antique weapons, he listened as his son detailed the bullying situation. And you're certain this Carter boy is the ringleader? Alessandro asked, swirling amber liquid in a crystal glass. Yes, father. Along with 3 others, Josh Sterling, Eric Montgomery, and Dylan Pierce. Alessandro nodded thoughtfully. Their families? Charles Carter, Real Estate Development and Venture Capital. Sterling's father is CFO at Meridian Bank. Montgomery family owns a shipping company. Pierce's mother runs an upscale salon chain. A smile creased Alessandro's weathered face. You've done your research, figlio mio. You taught me to know my enemies, Luca replied. And what would you have me do about these children? Luca met his father's gaze evenly. Nothing directly. I've already initiated the first stage. The anonymous tips about Carter's illegal practices have been delivered. I just need your contacts in banking and law enforcement to ensure the evidence isn't overlooked. Alessandro studied his son with pride. Not violence, but strategy. You truly are my son. He raised his glass slightly. Consider it done. The next morning, Charles Carter's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Board members, lawyers, even the company's PR team, all panicking about the FBI's unannounced visit and the rumors already swirling among investors. It's a mistake, Charles insisted to his lawyer. Someone set me up. The offshore accounts are in your name, Charles, his lawyer replied grimly. And the paper trail leads straight to you. This looks bad. Charles loosened his tie, suddenly feeling the walls closing in. A text from his son didn't help his mood. Dad, I need $5,000 for a new TV. Josh and the guys are coming over. Angrily, he typed back. Not now, Vincent. We have serious problems. At school, Vincent frowned at his phone. His father never refused his requests. Something was wrong. The thought was quickly forgotten when he spotted Luca entering the building. Hey, Romano, he called out. We have something special planned for you today. As Luca turned, his face expressionless as always, Vincent felt an unexpected chill at the slight smile playing on the quiet boy's lips. I'm looking forward to it, Luca replied, his dark eyes reflecting something Vincent couldn't quite identify. I have plans for you too. Vincent's phone buzzed during calculus. His father never called during school hours. Something was wrong. I need to take this, he muttered to Mr. Peterson, who frowned but nodded. In the hallway, Vincent listened as his father's normally confident voice cracked with strain. The FBI froze our main accounts this morning, Charles Carter explained. All company assets are under review. I've got lawyers working on it, but... His voice trailed off. What does that mean for us? Vincent asked, the implications slowly dawning on him. It means watch your spending. No more parties. No new clothes. Nothing until we sort this out. The line went dead before Vincent could protest. He stood in the empty hallway stunned. This couldn't be happening. Not to the Carters. Back in class, Vincent noticed Luca watching him with those unnervingly calm eyes. Had he been smirking? Vincent forced a confident expression, but his mind raced with his father's words. By lunchtime, the news had spread through business circles. Charles Carter, under federal investigation. Stock prices plummeting. Investors pulling out of deals. Josh Sterling found Vincent at their usual table. "Dude, my dad just called. What the hell is happening with your family's company?" Vincent stabbed at his salad. "Nothing. Just a misunderstanding. My dad says the feds are claiming tax fraud and illegal kickbacks on those downtown developments." Josh persisted. "He's freaking out because our bank handles all your family's accounts." Before Vincent could respond, his phone lit up with notifications, social media buzzing with news about Carter Enterprises. Someone had leaked details of the investigation to the press. Across the cafeteria, Luca sat alone, Marco absent with the flu. He methodically ate his lunch while typing occasional messages on his phone. "What do you mean, fired?" Josh's father shouted into his phone that evening. "I've been with Meridian Bank for 15 years. Josh paused in the doorway, listening as his father's face grew redder. "Because of my connection to Charles Carter? That's absurd. I had nothing to do with those accounts." After the call ended, his father sat heavily at his desk, head in hands. "Dad? What's going on? I've been terminated. Effective immediately." His voice was hollow. "The bank is distancing itself from anyone with ties to Carter Enterprises." Josh felt a chill. "But that's not fair." His father looked up, face ashen. "Life rarely is, son." Eric Montgomery strutted into the police station, confident the situation was a misunderstanding. His older brother couldn't possibly be involved in drug smuggling. "Through our family's shipping company? That's ridiculous," he told the desk sergeant. "My parents built that business from nothing." The sergeant's expression remained impassive. "Your brother was caught with 50 kilos of cocaine hidden in a container from Colombia. An anonymous tip led directly to him." Eric's stomach dropped. "Can I see him?" "After processing. The DA is pushing for maximum charges since the evidence suggests this has been going on for years." As Eric left the station dazed, his phone chimed with a text from Vincent. "My dad's company is collapsing. What the hell is happening to us?" Dylan Pierce found his mother in tears at their kitchen table, surrounded by papers. "They're shutting down all 5 salon locations," she sobbed. "Health department found critical violations at every site. I don't understand, we just passed inspection last month." Dylan picked up one of the reports. Black mold. Contaminated products. Unlicensed technicians. None of it made sense. "There has to be a mistake," he insisted. His mother wiped her eyes. "The fines alone will bankrupt us, even if I could reopen. Everything I've built, gone." Dylan's phone buzzed with messages from Eric and Josh, sharing similar tales of sudden disaster. 2 weeks later, Vincent slumped in his seat as Principal Harris lectured him about his 3rd detention that week. "Your behavior has been increasingly problematic, Mr. Carter. The fighting, the disrespect toward teachers." "Josh started that fight, not me," Vincent interrupted. "Regardless, your privileges are suspended. No parking on campus, no access to the senior lounge, and you're off the lacrosse team until further notice." Vincent gaped. "That's not fair. You never cared about anything I did before." Principal Harris's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps that was my mistake. Times change, Mr. Carter. Your family name doesn't carry the weight it once did." The truth of those words hit Vincent like a physical blow. In the school hallway the next day, Vincent watched as former friends scattered at his approach. Overnight, he'd become toxic. Association with Vincent Carter now meant social suicide. Even Josh, Eric, and Dylan were pulling away, each absorbed in their family catastrophes. Their group text chain, once filled with party plans and cruel jokes, now contained only desperate theories about their collective misfortune. Vincent spotted Luca at his locker and approached, needing someone to blame. "Enjoying the show, Romano?" he hissed. Luca turned, his expression neutral. I don't know what you mean. Everything is falling apart, and you're the only one who seems happy about it. I'm not happy or sad about your situation, Luca replied, though I find the timing interesting. Something about his tone made Vincent pause. What timing? Luca closed his locker. Just an observation. Your family started having problems right after you escalated your activities against me. You think this has something to do with you? Vincent laughed bitterly. That's delusional. Luca shrugged. Perhaps. Or perhaps there are consequences in this world that money and privilege can't shield you from. As Luca walked away, Vincent stood frozen, a cold sensation creeping up his spine. For the first time, he wondered if the quiet boy wasn't quite what he seemed. That night, Vincent looked up Romano online. Nothing significant appeared until he added business and his city name. A single article mentioned in Alessandro Romano as a private investor with suspected ties to organized crime families. Vincent stared at the screen, pieces slowly clicking together in his mind. The whispers followed Vincent through the hallway like persistent ghosts. 3 weeks into his family's downfall, Westlake Prep had transformed into unrecognizable territory. Where students once parted like the Red Sea for him and his crew, they now watched with barely concealed schadenfreude as the former kings of the school navigated their new reality. Did you hear? Vincent's family might lose their house. A sophomore whispered too loudly to her friend as he passed. I heard they're selling their cars, another added. Vincent kept his eyes forward, jaw clenched. His designer clothes, now unwashed because their housekeeper had been let go, hung on his frame like expensive armor against the changing tide. At the entrance to AP Literature, Mrs. Kensington stood waiting. Mr. Carter, a word before class. Vincent braced himself. Every teacher interaction now carried the sting of newly enforced rules. Your essay was subpar, she said, handing him a paper marked with a glaring D-. Resubmit by Friday or it's a failing grade. But I've always what? Submitted mediocre work and received unearned grades. Her eyes were flint. Those days are over, Mr. Carter. Merit matters in my classroom. Vincent took the paper, speechless. For years, a charming smile and his father's generous donations to the school's library had guaranteed him a comfortable B+ in every class. Inside, he slumped into his seat, noticing Luca already at his desk, immaculate as always despite his supposed modest means. Vincent's suspicions about the Romano family had grown obsessive over the past week, but concrete information remained elusive. In the administrative offices, Headmaster Phillips reviewed the disciplinary reports with Vice Principal Chambers. The Carter boy and his friends have accumulated more demerits in 3 weeks than the previous 3 years combined, Chambers noted. Phillips nodded. And with Charles Carter's legal troubles, there will be no more special consideration for his son. Should we be concerned about repercussions from the family? Phillips gave a humorless laugh. The Carters are finished in this town. It's the Romano family I wouldn't cross. Chambers looked up sharply. Romano? The quiet transfer student? His father visited last week to discuss Luca's academic progress. Phillips lowered his voice. Arrived with 3 security personnel and left a $10,000 donation for the science lab. Cash. You don't think? I think, Phillips interrupted carefully, that we should ensure young Mr. Romano receives the quality education his father is paying for, and that certain troublemakers don't interfere with any student's learning experience. The cafeteria had become a battlefield of shifting alliances. Vincent and his diminished crew sat at a small table in the corner, their prime center location now occupied by the debate team. This is insane, Dylan muttered, picking at food he'd brought from home since his mother could no longer afford the school's meal plan. Last month the soccer team begged us to attend their party. Now they're pretending we don't exist. My lab partner requested a reassignment, Eric added bitterly. Said association with me might compromise the integrity of their college applications. Josh remained silent, staring at his phone. His family's situation had deteriorated fastest, his father unable to secure new employment due to the banking scandal. We need to stick together, Vincent insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. Across the cafeteria, Luca sat surrounded by students who'd previously ignored him. Marco watched with amusement as 3 girls from the volleyball team laughed at something Luca said, his friend suddenly popular despite doing nothing to court the attention. "What's happening?" Marco asked when the girls left. "Since when do you have fans?" Luca shrugged. "People sense changing power structures. They're adapting." "Power structures?" Marco snorted. "This isn't one of your father's business deals." Luca's smile was enigmatic. "Isn't it though?" The final humiliation came during Thursday's assembly. Dean Foster addressed the student body about upcoming semester expectations. Additionally, she continued after covering academic requirements, the administration is implementing stricter enforcement of our code of conduct. Bullying, harassment, and destruction of school property will result in immediate suspension. Her eyes found Vincent in the crowd. Past behavior that may have been overlooked will no longer be tolerated. Westlake Prep stands for excellence in character as well as academics. The message couldn't have been clearer. The staff, once willfully blind to Vincent and his friend's behavior, had found their moral compass now that the Carter name carried no weight. After the assembly, Coach Miller pulled Vincent aside. "Carter, you're benched for Friday's game." "What? Why?" "Your grades, your attitude, take your pick." The coach sighed. "Look, I know you're going through something, but actions have consequences." Vincent watched him walk away, those words echoing strangely in his head. Actions have consequences. The exact phrase Luca had used weeks ago. That afternoon, Vincent found Fallen King spray-painted on his locker, the same locker where he'd once directed similar vandalism against Luca. When he reported it to the administration, he received only a form to fill out. "We'll investigate when resources permit," the secretary told him without looking up. In the bathroom, Vincent splashed water on his face, fighting back unfamiliar tears of frustration. The door opened, and Vincent straightened immediately, maintaining his facade. Luca entered, stopping briefly when he saw Vincent. Their eyes met in the mirror. "Enjoying your handiwork, Romano?" Vincent asked, voice raw. "I didn't vandalize your locker," Luca replied simply. "Not talking about the locker." Vincent turned to face him directly. "This is all connected to you somehow." "I know it." Luca dried his hands meticulously. "Perhaps the universe has a sense of balance." "Balance?" Vincent laughed harshly. "My father might go to prison. Josh's family is moving in with relatives. Eric's brother faces 20 years. Dylan's mother lost everything. And how many lives did you damage before facing consequences of your own?" Luca asked quietly. "How many students changed schools? Developed anxiety? Questioned their worth because of your cruelty?" The truth of those words landed like physical blows. For the first time, Vincent had no retort. Luca adjusted his tie in the mirror. "Everything in this world comes full circle, Vincent. Remember that." Vincent sat in his bedroom staring at the walls now stripped of expensive artwork and sports memorabilia, casualties of his family's desperate attempt to liquidate assets. Outside, a real estate agent showed potential buyers the sprawling property that had been his home since birth. Rain tapped against the window as Vincent connected final dots in the bizarre conspiracy he'd been mapping on a notebook. Every catastrophe that had befallen his family and friends traced back to the same starting point: the escalation of bullying against Luca Romano. His phone buzzed, a group text from Josh sent from his aunt's basement where his family now lived. "Someone just bought my dad's car at auction for 1/4 its value. Guess who? A corporation owned by Alessandra Holdings." Vincent's hands trembled as he Googled the name. Alessandra Holdings. A private investment firm with a single named partner, Alessandro Romano. Not a coincidence. Confirmation. Vincent's scattered research into the Romano family had yielded disturbing fragments, whispers of old-world connections, businesses that operated largely in cash, and a network of loyal associates across the city's infrastructure, police, banking. He dialed Josh. "I've figured it out." It's Romano, not Luca, his father. What are you talking about? Josh sounded exhausted. The quiet kid we've been tormenting? His father is Alessandro Romano. I think he's connected. Like organized crime connected. A long silence followed. That's insane, Josh finally said, but without conviction. Is it? How else do you explain everything falling apart at exactly the same time? The anonymous tips, the evidence appearing out of nowhere, the way the school administration suddenly turned against us? Another call beeped in. Eric. Vincent added him to the conversation. My brother just called from jail, Eric said without preamble. He asked if I'd been messing with the Romano kid? Said the guys who set him up mentioned it during the bust. The three fell silent, the implications sinking in. We need to talk to Luca, Vincent finally said. Tomorrow. The opportunity came during lunch the following day. For once, Luca sat alone, Marco absent with a college visit. Vincent approached solo, having convinced Josh and Eric to watch from a distance. We need to talk, Vincent said, sliding into the seat across from Luca. Luca continued eating his pasta unperturbed. About how your father is systematically destroying our families. Luca's fork paused midway to his mouth. For the first time, Vincent saw genuine surprise flicker across his face, quickly replaced by composed neutrality. What did you do to us? Vincent demanded, voice low enough not to attract attention but intense with desperation. I did nothing, Luca replied calmly. I simply endured your harassment while waiting for inevitable consequences. Consequences orchestrated by your family. Your father is Alessandro Romano, isn't he? The same man buying up my family's assets for pennies on the dollar? The same name that made my father turn white when I mentioned it last night? Luca carefully dabbed his mouth with a napkin. You targeted me without knowing who I was. That was your first mistake. So you admit it. Vincent hissed. I admit nothing. But I did warn you. Vincent's composure cracked. My father could go to prison. Josh's family is homeless. Eric's brother. Your father committed actual crimes, Luca interrupted. As did Eric's brother. The evidence was always there, waiting to be found. My father simply illuminated existing darkness. Vincent stared, finally understanding the power he'd accidentally challenged. What do you want? How do we make this stop? Luca studied him, dark eyes unreadable. I warned you that day in the parking lot. Now it's too late. There must be something. Perhaps you should ask your father about appropriate channels for such discussions. With that, Luca stood and left Vincent sitting alone, watched by curious eyes throughout the cafeteria, the fallen king publicly dismissed by the quiet boy he'd once tormented. That evening, Charles Carter locked himself in his home office, blinds drawn despite the darkness outside. His phone call lasted precisely 7 minutes. When he emerged, his wife waited anxiously in the hallway. Well? She asked. He's agreed to meet, Charles said hollowly. Alessandro Romano will see me tomorrow night. And he can fix this? The charges, the frozen accounts? Charles laughed bitterly. Romano isn't going to help us. He orchestrated everything. But why? What did you do to him? Not me. Vincent. Charles rubbed his face. Our son and his friends have apparently been tormenting Romano's son at school. Understanding dawned on Patricia Carter's face. The quiet Italian boy? That's Alessandro Romano's son? Charles nodded grimly. Our son picked the worst possible target. Vincent sat on the stairs, eavesdropping as his father explained to his mother exactly who Alessandro Romano was, his reputation, his connections, his ruthlessness toward enemies. The man Vincent's father had always dismissively called new money with old country tactics was revealed as something far more dangerous, a power broker who operated in shadows, using legitimate businesses to shield less savory enterprises. The doorbell rang, making them all jump. Patricia opened it to find a neatly folded note on the doorstep, delivered by a black sedan already disappearing down the street. Charles read it, face ashen. He handed it to Vincent without a word. The expensive stationery contained a single line of elegant script. "Your son should have known who he was dealing with." Vincent remembered Luca's words from weeks ago. "They're digging their own graves." Only now did he understand. It hadn't been an expression. It had been a promise. The restaurant was empty except for 2 tables, one where Alessandro Romano sat alone, sipping espresso, and the other occupied by 2 men who appeared more statue than human. Charles Carter approached with the desperate dignity of a condemned man seeking reprieve. "Mr. Romano," Charles managed, his custom suit now hanging loose on his frame after weeks of stress-induced weight loss. Alessandro gestured to the chair across from him. "Mr. Carter, your punctuality is appreciated." Charles sat, noting the contrast between his own trembling hands and Romano's perfect composure. Though in his 50s, Alessandro carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had never needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. "I understand my son has," Charles began, "been tormenting my only child for the better part of a year." Alessandro finished, his accent subtle but present. "Yes. An unfortunate situation. If there's any way to resolve this." "The situation resolves itself with your family's departure from the city," Alessandro stated matter-of-factly. "My associates have arranged a buyer for your remaining properties. The offer is fair, 20 cents on the dollar. Considering your alternatives, I suggest you accept." Charles stared. "You want us to leave? Just go?" "By the end of the month, yes." Alessandro sipped his espresso. "Your son should have known who he was dealing with." "He's just a boy," Charles pleaded. "Boys make mistakes." Alessandro's dark eyes, so like his son's, hardened. "My Luca was also just a boy when your son made his life miserable. The difference is that my boy showed restraint. He came to me not for vengeance but for justice." "Justice? You've destroyed everything I've built." "No, Mr. Carter. You built your empire on fraud and shortcuts. I merely revealed its foundation of sand." Alessandro placed his cup down. "Your son and his friends targeted mine without provocation, believing him weak because he was quiet. A grave miscalculation." Charles recognized the finality in Romano's voice. There would be no negotiation, no compromise. "What about the others? Sterling, Montgomery, Pierce? Their families have received similar arrangements, appropriate to their circumstances and their children's contributions." Alessandro stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Your son has received a valuable education, Mr. Carter. The knowledge that appearances deceive, that true power moves quietly, and that actions have consequences. Consider it preparation for his new life, one with significantly fewer privileges." As Charles left, he understood with grim clarity that Alessandro Romano had orchestrated not just financial ruin, but a complete lesson in humility, delivered with surgical precision. 1 month later, Vincent hauled the last box into their modest apartment in a city 300 miles away. His father had secured a middle management position through an old college friend, a stunning fall for a man who once commanded boardrooms. Their family name, once a golden key, now carried the tarnish of scandal and disgrace. Vincent had enrolled in public school where nobody knew him, or cared who he had been. Back at Westlake Prep, subtle but significant changes had transformed the social landscape. The space once dominated by Vincent and his crew now belonged to a diverse collection of students who'd previously existed on the fringes. Luca remained as quiet as ever, but the perception around his silence had shifted. Where before he'd been invisible, now his presence commanded a peculiar respect. No one could quite explain the change, but rumors persisted, whispers about his family, his connections, the mysterious downfall of the school's former elite. Romano, a senior lacrosse player, nodded deferentially as Luca passed in the hall. Others made similar gestures, not friendship exactly, but acknowledgement. Recognition. At lunch, Marco watched this curious phenomenon with amusement. "You're like a celebrity who never gives interviews," he joked. "Everyone's afraid of you now. Fear isn't the goal." Luca replied, stirring his coffee. Respect is. Well, mission accomplished. Nobody will ever mess with you again. Marco leaned closer. So, was this all planned? From the beginning? Luca considered the question. Around them, the cafeteria hummed with activity, students laughing, studying, living their teenage lives free from the hierarchy that had once oppressed many of them. In his pocket, Luca's phone vibrated with a message from his father. The Monaco situation requires attention this weekend. Time you learned international operations. Planned? Luca finally responded to Marco, a slight smile playing at his lips. Not entirely. My father simply taught me that patience is more powerful than impulse, and that true strength lies in knowing when to strike. But you knew who your targets were, what would hurt them most. Marco pressed. I observed. I listened. I learned what mattered to them: status, reputation, family legacy. Then I simply applied pressure to the right points. Marco shook his head in disbelief. You destroyed 4 families without ever throwing a punch. I revealed what they already were. Luca corrected, taking a sip of his espresso. Vincent and his friends chose their path long before crossing mine. Still, it's kind of terrifying when you think about it. Luca shrugged. My father always says business is about understanding human nature. What motivates people, what they fear, what they're willing to sacrifice. Is that what this was to you? Business? Luca's dark eyes surveyed the cafeteria, the new social order he'd indirectly created. Students who once lived in fear now moved freely. Even the teachers carried themselves differently, no longer bending rules for privileged few. Yes, he said finally, the faintest smile appearing as he set down his cup. It was just business.